Picture this. It's Friday evening, and your phone buzzes with a message from a group of friends. Hey, we're all heading out tonight. You in? And instead of feeling excited, you feel something closer to a quiet, sinking dread. Not because you dislike these people, not because something terrible happened, but because the idea of going out, of filling a room with noise and small talk and the performance of being okay, just feels exhausting before it even begins. So you type back something polite, "Can't make it tonight, maybe next time." And the moment you press send, your whole body exhales. You close the app, pour yourself something warm, maybe open a book or just sit in the comfortable quiet of your own space, and you feel fine. Better than fine, actually. You feel like yourself again. Does that sound familiar to you? Do you know someone who lives this way? Or be honest with yourself here, is that person actually you? Here's what most people will tell you about someone like that. They'll say this person is independent, self-sufficient, maybe even mysterious. There's a quiet kind of admiration that gets attached to people who don't seem to need others the way everyone else does. Society has started to romanticize the lone wolf, the deep thinker, the person who is perfectly content in their own company. But here's what nobody tells you, and this is the part that actually matters. The same psychology that makes you brilliant at being alone is the exact same psychology that can quietly cut you off from some of the most nourishing parts of being human. Your preference for solitude is real, it is valid, and it likely comes from something genuinely deep within you. But when it goes unexamined, when you never question why you need so much space or what you're actually protecting yourself from, it stops being a strength and starts functioning like a wall you didn't realize you were building. The gift of solitude can become a cage, not because you're broken, but because every coping mechanism, taken far enough, eventually becomes the very thing you need to cope with. So where does this come from? Why do some people genuinely recharge in silence while others wither in it? Psychology actually breaks this down into two distinct branches, and understanding which one applies to you changes everything about how you move forward. The first branch is neurological. Research consistently shows that introverted brains, and yes, neuroscience has confirmed this is a real biological difference, process dopamine differently than extroverted brains. Extroverts are drawn toward external stimulation because their nervous systems respond enthusiastically to reward signals from the outside world, social praise, novelty, excitement. But introverts are actually more sensitive to dopamine, which means they reach a state of overstimulation much faster. The loud bar, the crowded party, the non-stop socializing, these aren't just unpleasant, they are literally overwhelming at a neurological level. Think of it like this. If an extrovert's brain is a solar panel that needs direct sunlight to charge, an introvert's brain is a solar panel that charges perfectly well on a cloudy day. It just doesn't need as much light to function. The second branch is environmental, and this one runs deeper emotionally. For some people, preferring solitude has less to do with their nervous system and more to do with what they learned about other people early in life. If you grew up in a home where emotions were unpredictable, where love felt conditional, where you had to be on around people to feel safe, where being around others meant managing their moods at the expense of your own, then being alone became something more than a preference. It became a strategy. Solitude was where you weren't judged, weren't required to perform, weren't at risk of disappointing anyone. Your brain adapted. It learned that aloneness equals safety. You aren't broken. You aren't cold. You aren't bad at people. You are someone whose mind built a shelter that worked, and now, long after the storm has passed, you're still living inside it. Most people who prefer solitude carry threads of both branches at once. The neurological and the experiential are not mutually exclusive. They intertwine and reinforce each other across a lifetime. Understanding this is the first step, not toward changing who you are, but towards understanding why you are this way, and choosing consciously rather than just reacting from patterns you never examined. Now let's talk about the specific ways this psychology shows up in real daily life. These aren't dramatic red flags. They're quiet, ordinary moments that happen all the time and that most people simply write off as personality quirks. But each one is pointing to something deeper. The first sign is what's sometimes called a social hangover. The science behind this is something called arousal regulation. Your nervous system has a baseline level of stimulation that feels optimal. Psychologists call it the optimal stimulation level. And for people who prefer solitude, that baseline is simply lower than average. When social interaction pushes you above your personal threshold, your brain needs time and quiet to return to equilibrium. It's not laziness, it's your nervous system literally doing maintenance. What it looks like in real life, you go to a dinner party. Not a terrible one, actually a good one, and you enjoy yourself reasonably well. But the next day, you feel oddly flat, almost depleted, as if the evening cost you something you can't quite name.
While your friends are texting the group chat, recapping their favorite moments, you're lying on your couch with the curtains half drawn, needing the world to just be quiet for a while. The result is that people in your life sometimes wonder why you seem distant the day after socializing, and you don't always have a good explanation to give them. The second sign is what we might call the performing self. Psychologists use the term self-monitoring to describe the degree to which a person adjusts their behavior, tone, and expression to fit the expectations of those around them. People who prefer solitude often score high on self-monitoring, not because they are fake, but because they are deeply aware of the emotional currents in a room and feel a low-grade pressure to manage them. This ties closely to what sociologist Irving Goffman called impression management, the ongoing social performance we all do, but which some people experience far more consciously and exhaustingly than others. What it looks like, you're at a work meeting, and even though the conversation is fairly routine, some part of your brain is running a parallel track the entire time, monitoring tone, reading facial expressions, adjusting how you say things based on who's in the room, scanning for any signal that you've misspoken or made someone uncomfortable. By the time the meeting ends, you feel as if you ran an internal marathon that no one else in the room participated in. You get home, close the door, and something in you physically relaxes. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, your breathing changes, because when you're alone, the performance ends. The result is that solitude isn't just preferred, it's the only place where you can reliably stop watching yourself. The third sign is deep processing. Research on sensory processing sensitivity, a trait studied extensively by psychologist Elaine Aron, shows that roughly 15 to 20% of the population processes information at a significantly deeper level than average. This isn't about intelligence, it's about depth of processing. Where most people scan an experience and move on, highly sensitive processors linger, connect, compare, and reflect. Their brains are doing more work with the same input. What it looks like, someone makes an offhand comment to you on Tuesday. Nothing particularly significant, maybe a passing observation about your work or a casual remark about a choice you made, and you're still quietly turning it over in your mind on Thursday. Not in an anxious spiral, but in a genuine, investigative way, examining it from multiple angles, wondering what it really meant, how it connects to other things you've noticed, what it reveals. Meanwhile, the person who said it has completely forgotten it ever happened. The result is that you tend to move through the world more slowly than others expect, not because you're indecisive, but because you're doing work inside your mind that most people never do at all. The fourth sign is selective loyalty. This connects to what researchers call the quality versus quantity social preference. Studies on introversion and social bonding consistently find that people who prefer solitude tend to invest in a very small number of relationships with extraordinary depth rather than maintaining many relationships at a surface level. This isn't social anxiety, it's a fundamentally different value system about what connection is for. What it looks like, you have maybe 2 or 3 people in your life who you would genuinely call close. When you're with them, you can talk for hours about things that actually matter, real fears, real questions, real experiences, and it doesn't feel draining at all. In fact, it fills you up. But the thought of attending a party where you'd have to circulate through 20 conversations about weekend plans and what shows everyone is watching feels genuinely pointless to you, not just uncomfortable. You're not antisocial, you are differently social. The result is that people who don't know you well sometimes assume you're distant or unfriendly, while the 2 or 3 people who do know you can't imagine anyone more present. The 5th sign is environment sensitivity. This comes back to the neurological differences in stimulation processing. Environments that most people find pleasantly lively, a busy cafe, a loud restaurant, an open-plan office with constant background chatter, can create what researchers call attentional overload in people whose nervous systems are calibrated for lower stimulation. It's not sensitivity in the fragile sense, it's sensitivity in the accurate sense. Your brain is picking up more signals and processing them all simultaneously. What it looks like, you walk into a crowded space, maybe a busy shopping center or a packed restaurant, and within 10 minutes you feel a particular kind of mental fog settling in, a low-grade irritability, a narrowing of your ability to focus or enjoy anything. You're not in a bad mood, something in the environment is genuinely wearing on you in a way that your companions don't seem to notice or share. Meanwhile, you'll sit for 3 hours in a quiet library and emerge feeling genuinely refreshed. The result is that the spaces you inhabit matter enormously to your well-being, and choosing them wisely is less about preference and more about basic functioning. The 6th sign is the fantasy of disappearing. Psychologists describe this through the lens of restorative environments theory, developed by Rachel and Stephen Kaplan. When cognitive and emotional resources become depleted, when you've been on for too long, interacting and adapting and performing, the mind begins to crave environments that require nothing of it. Nature, quiet, solitude, these are literally restorative in the neurological sense, not metaphorically. What it looks like, in the middle of a perfectly normal workday or social gathering, you catch yourself mentally drafting an exit, imagining a cabin somewhere, a quiet apartment, a stretch of hours where no one needs anything from you, and you have no obligation to be interesting, capable, or present for anyone. You're not depressed, you're not running from your life, but some part of you fantasizes about disappearing, not in a harmful way, but in the way that someone who's been standing for 8 hours fantasizes about sitting down. The result is that this particular fantasy, when it becomes frequent or urgent, is one of your most reliable signals that your reserves are running low and your nervous system is demanding a reset. The 7th sign is communication preferences.
Research on introversion and communication consistently finds that people who prefer solitude often favor asynchronous communication, texting over calling, email over meetings, not because they're avoidant, but because asynchronous communication gives them time to think before responding. This connects to the deep processing trait. A text allows you to compose your thoughts fully, whereas a phone call demands an immediate response before you've had time to arrive at what you actually think. What it looks like, your phone rings, it's a friend, someone you genuinely like, and your immediate internal response is a small flash of resistance, not toward them, but toward the format. You'll call them back. You're not avoiding them, but there's something about the real-time demand of a phone call, the expectation that you'll be articulate and engaged on the spot with no time to think, that feels oddly invasive when you're not mentally prepared for it. Whereas a thoughtful voice memo or a long text exchange where you can think between messages, that feels natural, warm, genuinely connecting. The result is that people sometimes misread your communication preferences as aloofness, when really it's just a different relationship to time and reflection. The 8th sign is difficulty with small talk. This is closely linked to what's sometimes called the search for meaning in social interaction. Research suggests that people who strongly prefer solitude tend to have a higher threshold for what registers as a meaningful exchange. Shallow conversation doesn't just feel boring to them, it feels cognitively wasteful, like being offered a snack when you're waiting for a real meal.
What it looks like, you're at a social gathering and someone near you starts talking about the weather, then their commute, then a vague complaint about something at work. You nod, you smile, you say the right things, but inside you feel a kind of restless blankness. Not unkindness, but a genuine inability to find a foothold in the conversation. Contrast that with the moment when someone in the same room offhandedly mentions something they're genuinely afraid of, or a question they can't stop thinking about, and suddenly you are completely present, asking follow-up questions, leaning in, losing track of time. The result is that you're not bad at conversation. You are specifically and deeply good at the kind of conversations most people only have rarely, if ever. Here's where it gets more complex, and this is the part that very few people talk about openly. When all of these traits and tendencies operate for long enough, when you've spent years building your life around the protection and comfort of solitude, something else begins to happen inside the brain. It's subtle, it's gradual, and it can be easy to miss precisely because it feels like wisdom. Your brain starts to build a confirmation system around your preference for aloneness. Every time you cancel a social plan and feel relieved, your brain logs that as evidence. See, being alone is better. Every time a social situation turns out to be draining or awkward or disappointing, that gets logged too. People are exhausting. This confirms what I already know. But the times when connection was nourishing, the conversations that mattered, the moments of genuine warmth, those get weighted less, remembered less vividly, cataloged as exceptions rather than possibilities. This is what psychologists call a negative feedback loop, and it operates entirely beneath conscious awareness. You don't decide to build it. It builds itself, quietly and efficiently, the way all survival systems do. And then there's something even deeper, the gradual erosion of what researchers call interpersonal trust. People who have spent many years protecting their inner world through solitude, especially those whose preference was formed by early experiences where other people were unpredictable or emotionally unsafe, often develop a very specific and painful belief without ever stating it out loud. I am better off alone because other people, ultimately, will disappoint me or leave or need too much from me. This belief lives in the body as much as the mind. It shows up as a subtle flinch when someone gets too close too quickly. It shows up as a reflexive skepticism toward anyone who seems too interested in you. It shows up as a habit of keeping even the people you love at a manageable distance, close enough that you don't feel lonely, far enough that they can't quite touch your most tender parts. The tragedy here is not that you prefer solitude. The tragedy is when solitude becomes not a choice you make, but a conclusion you've already reached. When being alone stops feeling like something you actively want and starts feeling like the only safe option available to you. Here's something important to hold on to before we talk about what actually helps. You cannot and should not try to stop preferring solitude. You cannot rewire your nervous system by willpower. You cannot force yourself into extroversion, and you would not want to even if you could. The solution is not to become less of who you are. The solution is to understand yourself clearly enough to choose, consciously, freely, and without fear driving the wheel. The first principle is to distinguish between rest and retreat. This is the most important reframe, and it changes everything once it lands. There is a profound difference between choosing solitude because your nervous system genuinely needs to recharge and choosing solitude because you're avoiding something that feels threatening. Both look identical from the outside. You're home alone, it's quiet, no one is knocking, but the internal experience is completely different. Rest feels like arrival. Retreat feels like escape. Start asking yourself, honestly, is this solitude nourishing me, or is it protecting me from something I'm not ready to face?
You don't have to have the answer immediately. You don't have to act on it immediately. But developing the habit of asking the question creates a tiny gap between your impulse and your behavior, and that gap is where choice lives. The second principle is to redefine connection on your own terms. One of the most liberating realizations for people who prefer solitude is discovering that connection doesn't have to look like what everyone else says it does. You don't have to be at the party. You don't have to make small talk. You don't have to be on in groups or comfortable in crowds or available via phone call at any moment. What you can do is identify the specific conditions under which connection actually feels safe and nourishing for you. One-on-one rather than group, structured rather than open-ended, topic-based rather than purely social, and then build more of those kinds of connections with intentionality. Depth over breadth is not a compromise. For your particular nervous system, depth over breadth is the correct strategy. Start small. Choose one person you genuinely trust. Make a standing coffee, a regular walk, a specific ritual of connection that fits who you are rather than who you think you're supposed to be. You may be surprised how much you don't want to cancel it. The third principle is to work with the wall, not against it. If your preference for solitude was partially shaped by early experiences, if aloneness became safety because other people were unpredictable, then the path forward involves something more tender than strategy. It involves slowly, gently, and on your own timeline, allowing yourself to be seen a little more than feels entirely comfortable. This doesn't mean oversharing or forcing vulnerability. It means noticing the moments when you reflexively pull back and asking yourself, is this person actually unsafe? Or do I just feel unsafe because closeness itself has become unfamiliar? There is a crucial difference between protecting yourself from genuinely harmful people, which is wisdom, and protecting yourself from the risk of closeness altogether, which is the wall doing work it no longer needs to do. You can keep the wall, just consider leaving a door in it. Your preference for solitude is going nowhere. It is woven into the fabric of how your brain works, how your nervous system processes the world, how you encounter meaning and restore yourself after giving your energy to others. You don't need to fix it or fight it or apologize for it. But here is what can shift: the difference between solitude as a refuge and solitude as a resource. A refuge is somewhere you go because the outside world has become too much. It is defined by what it protects you from. It is reactive, defensive, and while it can feel like safety, it's really just the absence of threat. A resource is something different entirely. A resource is power you store so you can give it away. It's the deep breath before the meaningful conversation. It's the quiet morning that makes the difficult afternoon possible. It's the space in which you become, again and again, the most grounded version of yourself. Not so you can stay there, but so you can bring that person with you when you walk back out into the world. There's a metaphor that feels exactly right here. Think of the moon. It doesn't generate its own light. It disappears regularly, completely into darkness, and people notice its absence and wait. And then it comes back, and it illuminates the night precisely because it took that time in the dark. Your solitude is not you hiding from the world. It is you gathering light. If something in this video landed for you, if there was a moment where you thought, that is exactly what I do and I've never heard anyone describe it before, I want you to drop it in the comments below. Not a paragraph, not an essay, just the sign or the moment. Because one of the strangest and most beautiful things about being someone who prefers solitude is discovering, in a comment section of all places, that you are profoundly not alone in it. And if you know someone who constantly cancels plans, who seems to disappear for days and then reappear like nothing happened, who you've always quietly labeled as distant or hard to reach, consider sharing this with them before you decide what their absence means. Sometimes what looks like withdrawal is just someone doing the only thing they know how to do to take care of themselves. Leave your zodiac sign below too. Let's see which signs show up most in the comment section.